Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. Find a comfortable spot. Let the noise of the day fade away, and allow the quiet of the night to settle around you. We are once again journeying into the past. Not to the clamor of battlefields or the dry pronouncements of law, but to the hushed corridors of the imperial palace, to the flickering candlelight of private chambers where the heart of an empire beat in time with the hearts of its rulers. Tonight, we explore the gilded cage of Byzantine royalty and ask a question that echoes through its thousand-year history. Was their love a matter of duty or of desire? Did you know that one of the most powerful empresses in history was a former actress and courtesan, for whom an emperor changed the very laws of the land just to marry her? It's a story that reveals just how blurry the line between politics and passion could be. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, consider subscribing. It helps our small corner of history continue to grow. Now, close your eyes, and let us travel back to the marble and gold of Constantinople, the city of cities, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. For 1,000 years, this city was the center of a world. And at its heart was the Great Palace, a sprawling complex of halls, churches, and private apartments where the emperor and empress lived, not merely as people, but as living symbols of God's will on earth. Their lives were a public performance. And no performance was more critical than marriage. An imperial marriage was the ultimate tool of statecraft. It could seal an alliance with a foreign power, end a civil war, or legitimize a usurper's claim to the throne. The choice of an empress was a matter of grave political importance, a calculation of bloodlines, influence, and stability. She was expected to be a pillar of piety, a producer of heirs, specifically male heirs, and a silent partner in the divine theater of rule. In this world, personal affection was a luxury, a dangerous and often irrelevant variable in the grand equation of power. The desires of the heart were meant to be sacrificed on the altar of the state, but emperors and empresses were still human. They were still men and women of flesh and blood, with passions, jealousies, and a capacity for profound love and devastating heartbreak. Behind the stoic mosaic portraits and the rigid court ceremony were stories of devotion that defied convention, love affairs that scandalized the empire, and partnerships forged in the cold calculus of duty that slowly, unexpectedly, warmed into genuine affection. So tonight, we will pull back the purple curtain and look at the lives of 4 imperial couples. 4 stories that show the complex, often contradictory, nature of Byzantine royal love. We begin with a love story so famous, so scandalous, and so powerful that it has become the stuff of legend. The story of Justinian and Theodora. Before he was Justinian the Great, the lawgiver, the reconqueror, he was Flavius Petrus Sabatius, the ambitious nephew of the Emperor Justin. He was a man of keen intelligence and boundless energy, being groomed for the throne. And in the vibrant, chaotic world of Constantinople, he met her, Theodora. Her background could not have been more different from his. She was the daughter of a bear keeper for the Hippodrome's Green faction. A world of spectacle, gambling, and riotous crowds. She became an actress, a profession that in the 6th century was synonymous with courtesan. The sources, particularly the historian Procopius in his scandalous secret history, paint her as a woman of insatiable appetites and mesmerizing charm. To the rigid aristocracy of the court, she was utterly unsuitable, a stain on the dignity of the empire. But Justinian was captivated. He saw past the reputation, or perhaps was drawn to the very strength and intelligence it took to survive such a life. He saw a partner, a woman of formidable will and political acumen. He fell deeply, irrevocably in love. But there was a problem, a legal one. Roman law, which still governed the empire, forbade a man of senatorial rank from marrying an actress. It was an impossible match. For any other man, that would have been the end of it. But Justinian was not any other man. He was the heir to the throne. He persuaded his uncle, the Emperor Justin, to repeal the law. It was an extraordinary act. A public declaration that his desire for this one woman outweighed centuries of Roman legal and social tradition. In 525, they were married. 2 years later, they were crowned together, co-rulers of the Roman world. The court was aghast. But Theodora quickly proved she was no mere consort. She was an empress in her own right. Her intelligence, which Justinian had so admired, was now applied to the art of governance. She was a champion of the poor and a fierce advocate for women's rights, passing laws against forced prostitution and granting women more power in divorce and property ownership. She was also a shrewd political operator, with her own network of spies and allies. Their partnership was famously tested during the Nika riots of 532. A dispute at the Hippodrome exploded into a full-blown insurrection that set the city ablaze. The mob proclaimed a new emperor, and Justinian's generals and advisors panicked. They urged him to flee, to gather his treasure and escape by sea. The empire hung in the balance. It was Theodora who saved the throne. In a moment of supreme crisis, she stood before the terrified council and delivered a speech that would echo through history. She declared she would not flee. She said that royalty was a fine burial shroud. And that purple, the color of emperors, was the noblest color in which to die. Her courage shamed the men into action. Justinian, emboldened by his wife, ordered his generals to crush the rebellion. They did. The throne was saved. Not by the emperor alone, but by the emperor and empress together. Theirs was a partnership of equals. He consulted her on all matters of state, from theology to military strategy. In his legal codes, he referred to her as his most reverend consort given to us by God. When she died of cancer in 548, Justinian was devastated. He wept openly, a rare display of emotion for a Roman emperor. For the remaining 17 years of his reign, he never remarried. He passed laws that he noted were in accordance with her wishes and directives, keeping her memory and her influence alive. Theirs was a love born of pure desire. A passion that broke the rules and reshaped an empire. It set a standard, but a standard that was rarely, if ever, met again. It showed that love could be a source of immense strength. But it also made the more common reality of political marriage seem all the colder by comparison. Now, let us move forward in time, 4 centuries later, to a very different kind of imperial relationship. One not born of scandalous passion, but of cold, hard political calculation. This is the story of Constantine VII and Helena Lekepine. Constantine was born an emperor, or at least born to be one. He was the son of Emperor Leo VI, and he carried a special title, Porphyrogenitus, meaning born in the purple. This signified he was born in the special purple chamber of the palace to a reigning emperor. A mark of supreme legitimacy in a world of frequent coups and usurpations. But his legitimacy was fragile. He was the product of his father's 4th marriage, a union the Orthodox Church considered scandalous and barely legal. When his father died, Constantine was just a boy of 7. The empire was ruled by a council of regents, and the palace was a nest of intrigue. Into this power vacuum stepped an ambitious admiral named Romanos Lecapinos. He was a brilliant military man, but a provincial with no claim to the throne. He knew he could not simply seize power. He had to weave himself into the fabric of the imperial family, and he had the perfect tool to do it. His young daughter, Helena. In 919, Romanos arranged for Helena to marry the 13-year-old Constantine. With this marriage, Romanos became the emperor's father-in-law, a position of immense power. He took the title Basiliapater, or father of the emperor. But he wasn't satisfied. Within a year, he had himself crowned as co-emperor, pushing his young son-in-law into the background. For the next 25 years, Constantine Porphyrogenitus was an emperor in name only. He was a virtual prisoner in the palace, while his father-in-law and his brothers-in-law, who were also crowned as co-emperors, ran the empire. His marriage to Helena was the very instrument of his political sidelining. It was the definition of a marriage of duty, a union designed not for love, but for the raw acquisition of power. One can only imagine the atmosphere in their private chambers. Were they resentful? Did Constantine see in Helena the face of the family that had stolen his birthright? Did she feel torn between loyalty to her father and duty to her husband? The historical sources are largely silent on their personal relationship, but we can piece together a picture. Constantine, denied the chance to rule, turned his energies to scholarship. He was a gifted artist and a prolific writer. He gathered scholars and artisans around him, creating a vibrant intellectual court within the court. He wrote books on imperial ceremony, on the administration of the empire, and on foreign policy. Treatises that are now invaluable sources for historians. He was preparing himself, studying the art of governance for the day he might actually be allowed to practice it. And what of Helena? She stood by him. She bore him 6 children, including a son and heir, Romanos II. She provided the dynasty with its future, fulfilling her primary duty as empress. There are no records of strife between them, no scandals, no affairs. In the cutthroat world of the Byzantine court, a quiet, stable marriage was itself a form of success. Perhaps, over the years, their shared experience forged a bond. They were both trapped in the same gilded cage, navigating the ambitions of her father and brothers. Perhaps a partnership born of duty slowly blossomed into a quiet affection, a relationship built on mutual respect and the shared goal of survival. The turning point came in 944. Helena's own brothers, Stephen and Constantine, grew impatient. They staged a coup, not against Constantine, but against their own father, Romanos, forcing him into a monastery. They likely assumed that Constantine, the quiet scholar, would remain a figurehead. They miscalculated. The people of Constantinople, who had always held a special affection for the legitimate, born in the purple emperor, rioted in his favor. Seeing his chance, Constantine acted decisively. He had his brothers-in-law arrested and exiled to the same monastery as their father. After a quarter of a century in the shadows, Constantine VII was finally the sole ruler of the empire. And Helena was at his side, his undisputed empress. She was known to act as his political advisor, and their partnership seemed to be one of genuine collaboration. When Constantine died in 959, Helena, who had been the key to her family's rise, remained a powerful and respected figure as the Empress Dowager, helping to guide her son, Romanos II. Theirs was not a story of fiery passion like Justinian and Theodora. It was a story of endurance. A marriage that began as a political pawn in a usurper's game became the foundation of a long and stable reign. It suggests that in Byzantium, duty and desire were not always in opposition. Sometimes, duty, faithfully performed over decades, could create its own kind of love. A bond of loyalty and shared history that was, in its own way, just as strong as any passionate romance. But what happens when an empress, born to the throne, refuses to choose between duty and desire? What happens when she decides she can have it all? For that, we must turn to one of the most remarkable women of the entire Byzantine millennium, the Empress Zoe. Zoe was, like Constantine VII, a Porphyrogenita, born in the purple. She and her younger sister, Theodora, were the daughters of Emperor Constantine VIII. They were the last of the great Macedonian dynasty, which had ruled for nearly 2 centuries, but their father had no sons. The future of the dynasty rested on these 2 women. For years, they were kept in seclusion in the women's quarters of the palace, the gynaeceum. Their father seemed to make no effort to marry them off, a strange and dangerous oversight. It was only on his deathbed in 1028 that he finally acted. He chose a husband for Zoe, who was by then nearly 50 years old. Her duty was clear: marry the chosen man, make him emperor, and hopefully produce an heir to continue the dynasty. The man chosen was Romanos Argyros. He was a respectable, if uninspiring, aristocrat. He was already married, but his wife was conveniently packed off to a convent. Romanos and Zoe were married, and 3 days later her father was dead, and they were the new rulers of the empire. Romanos III was vain and incompetent, but he was utterly infatuated with his new wife. He lavished her with gifts and allowed her enormous influence, but Zoe was deeply unhappy. She was 50, he was 60, and the desperate attempts to produce an heir failed, creating a rift between them. Romanos grew distant and curtailed her spending, and Zoe, a woman who had spent her life in seclusion, now tasting power and freedom for the first time, grew bored. Her eyes fell upon a handsome young man at court. He was named Michael, a man of low birth, whose brother, the powerful eunuch John the Orphanatrophos, had secured him a position in the palace. Zoe fell passionately in love. According to the court historian Michael Sellos, who knew them personally, Zoe became brazen in her affair. She would have Michael sit with her on the imperial throne in private, telling him how much better he looked there than the old emperor. The affair was the worst-kept secret in Constantinople. In 1034, Emperor Romanos III was found dead in his bath. The sources are ambiguous. Some say it was a long illness, others hint at poison or drowning. Whatever the truth, on the very same day, Zoe summoned Michael to the palace. She married him, and he was crowned Emperor Michael IV. Zoe had seemingly achieved the impossible. She had fulfilled her duty by providing the empire with an emperor, but she had done it on her own terms, choosing a man of her own desire. But her happiness was short-lived. Michael was a capable ruler, but he suffered from severe epilepsy. He was also, perhaps out of guilt or fear, deeply suspicious of the woman who had raised him to the throne. He excluded Zoe from power, placing her under strict surveillance and keeping her confined to the gynaeceum once more. Her desire had won her a new husband, but it had cost her her freedom. Michael IV's health deteriorated, and he died in 1041. Before his death, his brother, John the Orphanatrophos, persuaded a reluctant Zoe to adopt Michael's nephew, also named Michael, as her son and heir. When the emperor died, this nephew became Michael V. He initially promised to honor Zoe as his mother, but his true intentions soon became clear. Fearing her power and popularity, he had her arrested and exiled to a monastery on an island, accusing her of treason. It was a catastrophic mistake. Zoe Porphyrogenita was the living embodiment of the legitimate dynasty. The people of Constantinople were enraged that this upstart, a man with no imperial blood, had dared to lay hands on their born in the Purple Empress. The city erupted in a violent revolt. A mob stormed the palace, chanting Zoe's name. In a panic, Michael V brought Zoe back from exile and presented her to the crowd. But it was too late. The people were not satisfied. They went to the monastery where Zoe's sister, Theodora, had been confined for decades and declared her co-empress. The two sisters, who reportedly despised each other, were now joint rulers of the Roman Empire. Michael V was overthrown, blinded, and sent to a monastery. For a few months, Zoe and Theodora ruled together, but the arrangement was tense. The court needed a male emperor, so Zoe, now in her 60s, decided to marry a third time. Her choice fell on Constantine Monomachos, a charming and extravagant aristocrat from a previous relationship. He was crowned Constantine IX. Zoe had once again combined duty and desire. She secured the empire's stability with a new emperor, but chose a man she personally favored. This third marriage was perhaps the most peculiar. Constantine brought his longtime mistress, a woman named Maria Sclerena, to live with them in the palace. In an arrangement that shocked the city, Zoe officially granted Maria the title of Sebast, a rank just below her own, and she was treated as a sort of junior empress. Zoe, it seems, was finally content. She had power, a husband she liked, and a stable court. She had navigated a treacherous world of love, murder, and politics, and had come out on top. Her life shows that, for a Byzantine royal, duty and desire were not mutually exclusive. They were weapons to be used in the constant battle for power and survival. Zoe used them both with masterful skill, but passion is a fire, and in the wrong hands, it can burn down an empire. Our final story is one of forbidden love. A story where desire casts aside all pretense of duty and leads to scandal, exile, and ultimately to a reign of terror. This is the story of Andronikos the First Komnenos. Andronikos was a cousin of the reigning emperor, the brilliant and chivalrous Manuel I. He was everything a Byzantine prince should be: impassably handsome, charming, a fearsome warrior, and a notorious womanizer. He was also fiercely ambitious and deeply resentful of his cousin's power. His life was a whirlwind of military campaigns, court intrigues, and scandalous love affairs. His most notorious affair was with his own niece, Eudoxia. When the emperor found out, Andronikos was thrown into prison. He escaped in a daring feat, beginning a long period of exile. He wandered the courts of the Near East, a charismatic and dangerous rogue prince. His travels eventually brought him to the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. There he met a woman who was his equal in beauty and royal blood, Theodora Komnene, the widow of King Baldwin III of Jerusalem. She was also his niece. She was the daughter of his brother, and by the laws of both church and state, their relationship was incestuous and utterly forbidden. But Andronikos, ever the rebel, was captivated. And Theodora, a young widow in a foreign land, was swept away by her charming, worldly, and dangerous uncle. They began a passionate and public affair that scandalized both the Byzantine and Crusader courts. Emperor Manuel, enraged by this new insult to his family's honor, sent orders for Andronikos to be arrested and blinded. The lovers, warned just in time, fled. They embarked on a perilous journey, seeking refuge among the Muslim courts of Damascus and Baghdad. For years, they lived as fugitives, their love forged in the crucible of shared danger and exile. They were outcasts, their lives a testament to a desire so powerful it defied every convention of family, religion, and imperial duty. Eventually, Andronikos was able to make peace with the emperor and returned to Constantinople, though Theodora and their children remained in the provinces. When Emperor Manuel died, he left behind a young son, Alexios II, with his mother, the Latin-born Empress Maria of Antioch, acting as regent. The regency was unpopular, and the people of Constantinople distrusted the empress's pro-Western policies. They looked for a savior, and they found one in the 62-year-old Andronikos. The charismatic exile, the great warrior, the man who had defied the old emperor, now presented himself as the champion of the people and the protector of the young emperor. In 1182, he marched on Constantinople and was welcomed as a hero. His rise to power was swift and brutal. He first had the young emperor's mother, Maria of Antioch, executed. Then he had himself crowned as co-emperor alongside the boy Alexios. A few months later, the boy was strangled with a bowstring on Andronikos' orders. Andronikos I, the romantic exile, was now the sole ruler of the empire. He married the boy emperor's 11-year-old widow, Agnes of France, in a grotesque parody of an imperial marriage of duty. His reign, which had begun with such popular support, descended into a paranoid reign of terror. He brutally suppressed the aristocracy, fearing conspiracies everywhere. The man who had lived his life by his own desires now ruled by them, and his desires were for vengeance and absolute power. His forbidden love for Theodora, the passion that had defined his years in exile, was now just a footnote to his bloody ambition. His tyranny could not last. In 1185, the people of Constantinople, the same people who had welcomed him as a hero, rose up against him. He was captured, and for 3 days he was publicly tortured and mutilated by the mob before being torn to pieces in the hippodrome. His story is a dark cautionary tale. It is the story of what happens when desire is untethered from any sense of duty or restraint. His passion for Theodora was real, a great romance played out on the world stage. But that same passionate, self-serving nature, when applied to governance, led to disaster. It showed that while desire could be the spark for a great love story, it could also be the fire that consumed an emperor and shook an empire to its foundations. So, we return to our question. Byzantine royal love. Was it duty or was it desire? As the night deepens, the answer seems to be that it was never just one or the other. It was a constant, shifting dance between the two. We saw in Justinian and Theodora a desire so strong it became a new kind of duty. A partnership that saved and strengthened the realm. In Constantine and Helena, we saw a duty so faithfully performed that it created a bond of respect and affection that anchored a dynasty. In the incredible life of Empress Zoe, we saw a refusal to choose. A masterful game where both duty and desire were used to claim and hold power. And in Andronikos, we saw a desire so absolute that it destroyed all duty and ultimately destroyed the man himself. The mosaics may seem stiff and formal. The histories concerned only with politics and war. But behind them are these human hearts, beating with love, ambition, jealousy, and devotion. They lived in a world where a marriage could decide the fate of millions, but a whispered word in a private chamber could change the course of an empire. The line between the personal and the political was a thread of spun gold, beautiful, strong, and easily broken, and now our journey is at an end. The candles in the great palace have burned low. The stories have been told. Let the echoes of these ancient loves, of duty and desire, guide you into a peaceful sleep. Rest well, and until next time, good night.